got my tea. I've got a nice cup of tea to have while I'm talking to you.
Perfect. You're all set.
So,
Perfect. We'll start first with your record. Please state your name and your position at UTEP.
my name is Keith Pannell. I'm a professor of chemistry at the University of Texas at El Paso. I'm also the director of an NIH program called the MARC, M-A-R-C, which is basically was, and in my mind still is, a minority access to research careers program. Politically, they changed the name a couple of years ago to maximizing access to research careers, but I don't like that. It was started with a particular idea of encouraging African Americans in particular at that time to go into science. It was fought for very hard by the Black Caucus in Congress, and I dislike the fact that they've changed its name.
Okay.
And I've got tenure, so I could say what the hell I like.
Wow, okay. All right. Thank you for saying that. Did you have a chance to see the questions from Dr. Dasgupta?
I did weeks ago, but I decided that I didn't want to look through the questions because then I'd have to be thinking about them, and then the response I would give you would be less than spontaneous, more rehearsed, more thought out. And although that is a good scientific modus operandi, you know, to think carefully about things, this is a social activity. This is Keith talking to you because I enjoy Deepan Wita. I enjoy the novelty she brings to discussions that we have in chemistry. And so I thought I'd give her the, what's the word that I'm looking for? The privilege or the honesty of being spontaneous in my responses. So I don't remember the questions, but I'm sure you've got them and we'll go through them one by one, I suppose.
Yeah, of course. I have them right here.
Tell me before we get involved, what do you do? You're a graduate student or an undergraduate student in philosophy, or?
Yes, right now, this is my last semester at UTEP. I'm a senior undergraduate student, and I have a double major in philosophy and multimedia journalism.
Oh, wonderful. Well, journalism, I like. I'm a great fan of radio station here in town.
Yes, you do a lot of work with journalists, and it's really interesting.
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah,
Anyway,
that was actually.
What are you going to do when you graduate?
I'm going to Western Michigan University in the fall. Hopefully, if the pandemic allows it.
Sorry, where is it? Western Virginia?
Western Michigan University.
Where is that?
In Kalamazoo, Michigan.
Okay, good.
Yes. Thank you. Okay, so how about we start talking about your work with Science Studio? Yes, we're wondering how it all started, right? What kind of thinking led you to develop this platform? Did it facilitate science communication in the community of UTEP or El Paso? Things like that.
It's an interesting story. I arrived in El Paso straight from England. I had a faculty position there, but I was going broke. And I came purely as an economic refugee, all right, to the United States. There's no ambiguity about that. Brought my family with me. And I arrived in El Paso just by chance. At the very same time, the National Public Radio was really taking off within the US. And, you know, the radio news programs, All Things Considered was the first one, I think. I really liked it. It just reminded me very much of the BBC. It seemed to have an integrity. I liked it. There was a station in town. And that station also had a manager called Louis Valles, who played really good jazz and introduced me to some jazz artists I didn't know about, that I've now become so familiar with, Keith Jarrett in particular. And also they had classical music, and I listened to music all day, all right, classical music predominantly, and then also jazz. And so I just love the radio station, and public radio stations need money, right? That's the whole business. And so every year they have a fund drive. And so I volunteered to go on to the radio in the morning from around 6:30 until about 9, every morning for a week, to pitch, to try to get people to make donations to the radio station. And I had a good friend at the time. His name was Kiki Cooper, Professor Clarence Cooper. He's still around, the physicist. And he and I were there one morning. And it's very difficult to get people to give money, especially at 6:30 in the morning, right? It's like pulling out hen's teeth, tough. And so we're sitting there, and I'm saying, Kiki, it's so quiet. Where are all these people? Why aren't they picking the phone up and giving us money? And he said, I don't know, they need to be woken up. I said, oh, I'll tell you what, Kiki, let's ask them a science question. And so it goes. The first person to call in the correct answer to the science question had the privilege of paying $200 to the radio station. That was the humor, right? You get it right, you contribute. So we asked this question, and lo and behold, all sorts of people started to phone up with the answer to the question.
Wow.
But most of them didn't get it right, all right? But the bottom line was it got something going. And so I said, there are people out there that think they know a little bit about science or want to know a little bit about science. We should think about how to, do something for them. And so that started the idea of doing a radio show, Science Studio, where we would do different formats. Some are more successful than others. One of them, for a year or so, Kiki and I would have each week a science teacher from a high school who would ask a question that was the most difficult question she got during, or he got, during the last week. And then we talk about it. And we also had fun. You can tell I'm social, all right? I think it's important to laugh as much as you can, because much not to laugh about. You've got to have fun and enjoy what it is you're doing. So the program started out like that, and then it evolved over the years. We've been doing it for, about 35 years, perhaps. I can't tell you the first program, what it was, but I've been doing it for a long time. And I've had different co-hosts over that period. But the program has evolved now into a 28-minute conversation with a scientist about not just what the science is that they do, which is important, but who is this scientist? To give the lay public an idea that, hey, some of these people are interesting. Scientists have got this sort of image of hair all over the place, buttons missing on shirts, and, just totally distinctive. Never meet them in a bar. Well, wanted to change that. Wanted to show the lay public who are interested that, in fact, scientists are just like every other people, except we have a different career. We do something slightly different. And so we talk about the scientists for 10 minutes, how they became what they are. And then we talk about the science that they do. Why do they do it? Is it important, or is it just something that they enjoy? And of course, part of science from the academic point of view is constantly training students, right? So, I mean, it was just doing research and teaching. Well, if it was just doing research, I think I'd get bored. I obviously do a lot of research, but if I didn't have this face-to-face contact with students, so I could see them struggling with the issues, but I could also see them sometimes seeing the light of day because of something that I'd said. I think that's as important as anything that I do. My papers, I published about 300 papers by now, and I don't necessarily remember all the research that I've published, but I will never forget the individual students that were in that group at that particular time, and I followed their careers since, and that's a big part of science, and I wanted that to come across to a certain extent in the radio show. So it's been fun. We did get an award once for a very outspoken program we did on the AIDS epidemic way earlier in the 90s, where school teacher, it was a live program. Sometimes we do live programs where the listeners will call in. And this teacher called in and said she wasn't allowed to talk about sex at school because that just wasn't allowed. And how do you talk about transmission of AIDS without at some stage getting into public? And I thought, this is ridiculous. What school is this? Who's the name of the headmaster or the principal or whatever? And I think because of that, we got a Texas Public Media Public Health Award of some description, or the radio station did. So it's always been fun.
It sounds like a very fun project and interesting to talk about, science with people that have different backgrounds and different stories to tell, different motives also, because you mentioned it might as well be that they enjoy doing science, or that, the work that they do is important in addition to them enjoying doing that work. I'm wondering how you have mentioned some of the thinking that led to develop this platform of you being interested in this BBC inspired platform, right? But I'm also wondering if there is some other thinking that needs to be required to talk about science in a platform that's not that doesn't have a scientific audience, if that makes sense.
A great question and a good lead-in.
Thank you.
If science was as generally accepted as scientists think it is, there wouldn't be perhaps a need for too many programs like the one that I do, because scientists by and large have a good reputation, all right, for what they do. I mean, maybe outside of science, my lifestyle is not something that people would find particularly attractive. I can't think why they wouldn't, but the bottom line is, as a scientist, I get a lot of respect, all right? I know that. My voice is rather different and distinctive in El Paso. So when I go out places and start to talk, 50% of the time someone says, you're the guy on the radio, and then we'll start to talk about radio and about science.
Right.
The trouble is that I perceive right now is that although scientists may individually have a good reputation, there's a movement in North America, maybe around the world, to say, well, okay, well, the scientists, they do that. But decisions, political decisions, social decisions, they really should keep their opinions to themselves, right? There's a belief out there, I see, that they don't necessarily believe in the science. And why? Because scientists don't come out with hard and fast dictates. I will not tell you 100%, I just cannot, that, say, global warming, a big issue today, is caused by us burning coal or natural gas, CO2 emissions. It's more complicated than that. There are a lot of other issues, but there's no doubt in my mind that a very major contribution to global warming is indeed the lifestyle of the nations. This whole business of creating energy by also at the same time creating CO2. I think that's important. But scientists never say they're 100% certain. We always deal in probabilities, all right? And somebody sits down and does one of these mind experiments. And we'll come back to mind experiments later, if I may. There's another reason that global warming is on the rise, and it's got nothing to do with CO2, all right? And whether they're correct or incorrect, but if they've got a good logical argument, then people, scientists, will examine this. They won't just throw a finger and say, this is rubbish, all right? Maybe they do sometimes, if it's a stupid enough idea. But the bottom line, scientists are always looking at evidence. One of the basic tenets of science is if you can disprove something that has been well established for generations, this is a tremendous discovery, right? We don't set up experiments. I'm a chemist. I set up experiments. I don't set up experiments to prove that necessarily an idea is correct. Quite often I think, well, if I do this experiment and the result is here, that will disprove. Well, that's not the normal modus operandi of most people. Most people don't go around in their jobs trying to disprove what it is they take for granted. They just don't do that. Some do, and that puts us apart, and therefore rather prone not to be dogmatic. And I think currently people, they like a certain amount of dogma, whether it's political dogma, religious dogma. People feel comfortable knowing, hey, these are the rules.
Oh, your video stopped, Dr. Pannell.
I know. It should come back, I hope. Yeah, there we are. I got a phone call coming in from my dentist.
You were talking about people wanting dogmas.
The majority of people like the idea of, whether you call it dogma or a set of rules which are well understood and everybody agrees to, they like that. They like the comfort. That's why we have religions, because religions provide a lot of intellectual and spiritual comfort to a large number of people. And so when they talk to a scientist, and all of a sudden, scientists aren't going to be quite as dogmatic. They've got this probability idea that there may be, you know, a slight doubt in my mind about what I've just told you. Mm-hmm. That disturbs people. It really does. And when you put that into then the other aspect, not only does it disturb them, but that some of the conclusions that scientists come to are in fact much less simple to go along with for society. There's a problem out there. And so I think the more that we can have programs like, like Science Studio, right, where people can listen to and interact reasonably directly. I've got to do something here. Yeah, somebody wants to send me a message. Ah, shit. Where are you? I've lost you.
I'm still here.
Okay. Yeah. Anyway, so there's a problem. Not only do scientists quite often come up with uncomfortable situations for the general lay public because they won't be adamant. They won't say yes with absolute religious assurity that you're going to go to heaven. But well, you know, this is cause and effect. So when they can go and listen to a radio show where they can listen to a scientist and think out loud, think through the logic, this I think is, well, it's important.
Do you think maybe that Science Studio or programs related to the platform help alleviate some of the uncertainty that people may experience when talking about science and you know the probabilities that nothing can be assured 100%?
One would think the answer to that is yes. But again, I'm not going to tell you 100% yes. I meet a lot of people who claim the program who've got nothing to do with science. They're usually educated. They've usually gone to college, I would say. And they say, oh, that was a really interesting program. And, you know, they learn interesting insights into the scientists, which they will remember, where they may not remember necessarily the issues of the science. But as long as they remember, hey, that scientist was interesting, that's halfway to winning the battle.
Right. Okay. Do you think maybe that at UTEP or El Paso that you have experienced some of these, I don't want to say backlash, but you know, people that are comfortable with dogmas and sort of against science, or how do you think the program has interacted with the community at UTEP or El Paso?
I myself, in interactions with most people that I come in contact with, whether it's in a restaurant, whether they overhear a conversation, they know my voice, or whether it's going to a church and talking to people, I've never met anyone that is actually actively hostile to science. I haven't. Maybe that's just because they know they're talking to me, all right, and then they'll go home and totally opinion. But I haven't come across that hostility. What I have come across is that some people say, well, science is just one approach to life. You know, it's a modus operandi. It's a set of activities that one does. You do experiments, you do this, the other. And you come up with theories based upon your experiments. But I have met people who say, but, you know, I think you also need to understand, and this goes to religion in particular, look, I take my Bible as the document that I live my life by, right? There are things in the Bible that I take at faith, right? And I'm not going to, and, you know, you talk about different things to do with the age of the earth, for example. Some people will claim, because somewhere in the Bible it says the earth is 10,000 years old. I don't quite know if that's correct, but they say, but you know, that's just another theory. You know, we should put that on an equal footing to science. That I do hear from time to time. There are people that I know, scientists, who think evolution's fine for a certain limited number of bacteria or species, but cannot jump to the conclusion that we are also part of an evolutionary process. And they would say, no, 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 you know, you've got to put our approach on an equal footing to yours. I find that it's difficult to do, for one thing, and that's about as close as I've come to having disagreements. But it's been couched in very polite, nice terms, right? It's never been really.
Right. Right. Okay. So we talked about you know, the disadvantages maybe. I don't know if there are disadvantages about talking with sort of hostile people, but I want to talk about now if there has been some benefits in the rhetoric, or has it facilitate any communications in the community, your program, if you have perceived any benefits.
I didn't. Excuse me, I didn't catch the question.
Oh, sure. That if your program has facilitated any science communication, or if you have perceived some other benefits in the community.
I don't. I suppose if people recognize my voice, I don't know if that's a benefit or not a benefit. All right, but it's. I'd hardly say it's a benefit. But, you know, science covers a large range of topics: oceanography, space exploration, chemistry, and even, philosophy of science, which is what Stephen Reader's big into, and I get a kick out of. So it's made me much more broad-minded. It's also given me, I'll say this because it's true. I started out as a young assistant professor here, and it was great fun. I had a lot of fun. I really did. Can you see me? I've got this message on my screen.
Yes, I can still see you.
Can you see that?
No,
Oh,
not
you can. Okay.
only you.
Okay, because it's now they want to change my software. Christ, it's always something. All right.
Okay.
I've become much more understanding because of interacting on the radio, and I've got some good friends over in psychology. Larry Cohn is a professor of psychology at UT El Paso, and he's a very sweet and very, very bright man. And he will call me every now and again and say, Keith, I listened to your science studio. That was really good. And I've done some psychology faculty that he knows. He says, this is really good. It's an important program. And I realized that there are people outside of science, academics I'm talking now, on campus, who listen to this program from time to time.
Right.
And that has given me a lot of opportunity for talking to people. Mainly here, I'm talking about faculty doing research across the campus. A couple of years, or 3 years ago, whenever it was, UT El Paso became 100 years old, right? And during that particular time period, I did another series of radio shows to communicate all the research that was going on campus. I called it 100 at 100. So I chose, from my own interest and point of view, 100 people to talk to who were doing research on the campus at UT El Paso. And that covered music, philosophy, history, you name it, a little bit of science, not too much, English literature. And that was a very, very good experience for me, because I realized that research, this word, tends to be one that scientists, and to a certain extent engineers, but scientists tend to think we do research, right? And people have hobbies, all right? So go to the English department. There's a fellow there called Tony Stafford, who did a brilliant piece of research on Macbeth. This is the Shakespeare play, which has been studied up to the gazoo by people for years and years, hundreds of years. And yet he came up with this whole new approach. And this approach was that every decision that was pivotal to the progression of Lady Macbeth's activities was preceded by the fact she got drunk. Because he took the text and looked at the words and made a compelling argument that, hey, alcohol was a big issue in the storyline of Macbeth. And I thought, my God, brilliant. And it's published in some literary magazine. And I first heard of this about 15, 20 years ago, because the other things I like to do is these research students that I tell you in the minority access to research careers, there's 16 of these students. They get good stipends each month from NIH. They do basic research in some of the best labs on campus, biomedical labs, chemistry, biology, physics, etc. But I have always felt that scientists are a little bit, having said what wonderful guys we are, I also think we're rather close. What we do is research. Other people, like I say, have hobbies. And so I made it my business over the 30 odd years of running the program. Every week, every week. Every third week, I will bring a faculty member from the rest of the campus outside of science to talk to these students about what their research is. And this, I think, is one of the best things that I've done for the students in science. Make them realize that, as I believe, really the most creative minds on campus aren't necessarily in science, but they're outside of science. In science, we work with big instrumentation, you know, $500,000 for this, $1 million for that, big teams, all right? And over there, they work generally in liberal arts, in history, whatever, or English. They're working with their own imagination. They're brilliant. And I think that's an important thing that I've done for the students, to make them realize the integrity, the intelligence, and the absolute creativity of people outside of science doing research. And most of them never knew this. You know, they just think research is all about going to the literature, all right? So I think that's an important thing. And so this 100 at 100, I had a lot of fun talking to people right across the board. And it was a great year. I enjoyed it. You can listen to them. They're all on radio station KPEP, 100 at 100.
Yes, that sounds like an amazing project. It's sort of what Dr. Dasgupta and I had in mind when talking about, you know, scientists and talking with them about, you know, their thinking process and these other projects that don't necessarily include one discipline at a time, right? And you seem to be like a very essential person for this project because you have talked with other people from other areas.
I bring over liberal arts people to talk about their research to scientists. They come over and talk to the students, some faculty also. There's not much of it the other way. And that's one of the big problems, that if you haven't grown up with science, it's very difficult to get into the conversation sometimes. You know, you're using another language, and that's complex. Deepan Wita has done this. I've been over, and so some of my colleagues in chemistry, to her classes in philosophy to talk about what we do. And that's been, I think, useful, at least I hope it has.
Right.
Yeah. I'm going to fiddle with this again because I don't like this message.
Of course.
Okay, now where are you? Okay. Good.
Okay, perfect. You were just talking about, you know, how you have invited philosophy faculty to the classes and to the program as well. I want to ask now about how this relationship began and specific focusing on the MARC program.
Yes, it started because of the Minority Access to Research Careers program. It's funded by the National Institutes of Health. It's about $550,000 a year, and it's been going on for 30 odd years. Not always at that level of support. It's inflation. But one of the concerns in the biomedical community in North America and elsewhere is, do the people doing the research have a sort of an understanding of the ethical responsibility that they have in doing their research? All right. I mean, history is full of, unfortunately, scientists, doctors, medical people participating in programs which, as we look back on them now, were rather unethical, allowing people with a certain disease not to know they had the disease, or not be having experimental drug treatments and things. And So that's a historical thing. I think also there's an understanding that pressure on scientists to publish and get results is mounting all the time. This is especially true in areas that have to do with health. I mean, I'm an inorganic chemist. I study things like tin, lead, germanium, silicon, and this is a sort of a nice little intellectual backwater in science, if you like. I mean, it comes interesting new results that people like, but it's not going to impact society in a big way like cancer research or coming up with a new approach to treating Alzheimer's disease, for example. And so the people who can make impact on biomedical health related issues, there's a lot of rewards out there. They can start their own companies. They'll get prizes, but they've got to work hard and they've got to be constantly putting out new results. Well, the pressure on a lot of these people has been evidently too much. And every now and again, one reads about an article where all the data had to be withdrawn because it was either fabricated or it was somehow modified inappropriately to make it look like it was better than it was, if they left out certain results which didn't agree with the result that they wanted. So there's an understanding that pressure on certain types of science has become very, very high. And therefore, the NIH have decided, well, you know, maybe we need to have more ethics, background, coursework, exposure to people like deeper who will question all the way along the line what it is you're doing, how you're doing it. And so the NIH said, hey, you're running this training program because the program that I run is for juniors and seniors, and they're all supposed to be going on after they've written an undergraduate research thesis. They all go to graduate school for PhDs. That's the idea. 67% do, 10, 15% go MD, and then some just say, hey, research is not for me. And that's good that they find out before they go to graduate school. So, and I said, look, organize some aspect of your MARC program which brings the students into contact with appropriate techniques of research, ethical approach to doing research. And so I had some friends over in philosophy, and from the friendship that I had, Jules Simon is one of the faculty over there that I talked to about 7, 8 years, 9 years ago, and said, look, why don't you come in and do something for us? Talk to us about your concept of what are ethics? Are there different ethical modes? You know, one person's ethics doesn't necessarily agree with somebody else's. Kantian ethics as opposed to utilitarian ethics. I don't remember all the variations on a theme, but the point is, the students would be well advised to know something about this. And so Jules came over with another faculty member, Garballo, Dr. Garballo, who has since left, and they started a course once every 2 years, so that every student would take it at least once, to talk about the ethics of different issues associated with not just science, but society.
Right.
Then Garballo left, went to Florida somewhere, and I met Deepan Wheater, and she was a breath of fresh air. I just love the woman. All right, I call her Deep. I don't call her Deepan Wheater. I call her Deep because every time I open my mouth in front of her, I can see that she's analyzing deeply everything that I've said. She doesn't say anything too flippant because she will take it and analyze. She's a profound thinker, and she's never at a loss for connectivity between something you're doing and something I just love the woman. And so she took over on this program. And then she also took it one stage further. She said, look, I need to find out more about what scientists are, you know. So she started coming to chemistry seminars. That's where we bring in every week a visitor from somewhere in North America or around the world who will give us a very technical talk about, you know, what they do. And she comes to the, she listens, and I know it because I'm in charge of the seminar, and I know at the end, she'll raise her hand and she'll ask a question which is completely distinctive to any of the technically oriented questions that we have been asking.
Right.
And some people get quite surprised by this. Others just love it. And I'm one of the people that just loves it. And so she's become quite a well-known fixture in the chemistry department. And I think over time will do in other science departments. She started with us because the mark was an introduction. And I guess she enjoys talking to me. We both have attitudes about education, Indian education, British education, which I don't know if you're going to get to it, but you know, the diversity of education, the diversity of science is much diversity in science. If you analyze it, depending upon your definition of diversity. If you want to come to that later, we will.
Right. Yes, I do want to talk about you know, there's this other question about how these relationships with philosophy faculty or any other faculty that's outside science, would it be good for professional science, right?
I think it's good from my point of view in that it's a big dose of humility for scientists. That's why I do it for the students, right? As I told you, I tend to think scientists are rather arrogant. What they do is research, right? With all this equipment, big teams. And I think they discount the creativity and just absolute brilliance of colleagues that are not in the scientific arena doing research, which is equally valid. I think it's just as good for people to recognize that you can read Shakespeare 300 odd years later and have a whole different attitude towards the characters. It's just equally as valid as making tin lead compounds that I like to make because I find them intrinsically attractive, right? I mean, I like attractive models, but on a scale, one is basically the same as the other. Now, maybe I'm training more people to do science research, and that raises the level of scientific research a slight notch higher than reading all about drunkenness in the days of Macbeth and Lady Macbeth. But it's a small step. It's a small step.
Right.
I think.
Right. Okay. But you know, thank you for saying that. Intellectual humility is really I think for me it's a really big important thing for me to learn and for me to experience with others. So thank you very much for acknowledging that there is importance in not only learning humility but also, you know, recognizing the ethical side of doing research in these other areas that you have obviously focused in your classes. Thank you so much for doing that. Sure. My next question is about diversity now.
My chemistry one day. When do you leave town? In September?
I'm sorry?
When do you September to graduate school?
I'm supposed to graduate. I was supposed to graduate this Saturday actually, but then, you know, the pandemic happened and then we're now supposed to graduate in September sometime or August. We're no one's sure at this point.
Okay, what's next?
Sure. My next question is about diversity now. You know, yeah, we need to ask that. Can there be any true diversity if we just pursue racial and ethnic diversity, and ethnic, I'm sorry, and ethnic diversity?
Um, it's, it's a deep question. Um,
It is.
the MARC program was initiated, as I said, way back 30, 40 years ago, to address an issue. And the issue was that in biomedical research and biomedical research practitioners, very, very, very small number, percentage-wise, of African American practitioners. You know, there just wasn't a very clear pathway for African American young people to think about a career in biomedical research. And since that's an important and large 15, 20%, I don't know what it is exactly, percentage of the American demographic, this seemed to me, not to me, sorry, this seemed to the people that came up with the program to be a glaring inadequacy, right? So it was founded on the basis that I'm white, Anglo-Saxon, and I've even come from Europe. Why am I teaching at the University of Texas at El Paso? Why isn't my name Ramirez? I mean, we have a few Ramirez, I'm sure. But the point is, why is there this large number of European trained people teaching UTEP or around the world, or Chinese for that matter, but very few African American faculty doing basic research at American universities? And you could have added to that 40 years ago a much smaller cohort of Hispanic faculty doing basic biomedical research. And so this program, the MARC program, was set up to counterbalance that negative demographic statistic, all right? And so, yes, diversity was ethnic diversity was the first thought process. Then say things like, and if you get more ethnic diversity, maybe the biomedical research focus will shift more. For example, I mean, I suppose this could be true, is true. In the Hispanic population, the issue of diabetes, big one, all right? I grew up in England. I knew of the word diabetes. I don't know as a student, I knew there were two types, all right? I certainly thought that it was a disease that was so easy to control. All you needed was your insulin or whatever, and you'd be fine. But that wasn't, I mean, now I know so much more, all right? And so the argument could have been made that by having a bigger ethnic diversity, then the focus of biomedical research in particular would be broadened. So sickle cell anemia, for example, more money would be put into trying to find, well, we know the cause, but how to cope, how to unmutate, if you like, the hemoglobin proteins. So that's a perfectly valid statement. So that ethnic diversity can, in fact, grow into refocusing on some of the diseases and health issues, the health disparities in North America. That's a fair comment. Deepan Wheater, bless her, asked this question. I mean, she asked it to me the first time years ago. I don't know if it was her house, my house, it was in a bar, if it was in a coffee shop. She said, Keith, you know, how can there be more diversity in science if, and then she took her own experience from India. She said, in India, we've got really good scientists, but they're modeling themselves after British science because they all wanted years ago go to Cambridge or Oxford or Durham, but they model them after a European science. And he said, how? She said, you know, this isn't surely good. So is the question she asked, which you've just asked. Is there more diversity in science because there's more ethnic diversity amongst scientists? And of course, this is one of the questions which rattles around in my head because it's a clever question.
Mm-hmm.
I haven't come to a conclusion, except that I do believe, in a sense, she's being impish. She's stirring the pot, all right? Because maybe that's not a question that needs to be asked. And if you don't have to ask the question, you don't have to answer it, okay?
Mm.
Because does it make any difference? Because science is an activity. It's a social activity. We're all social animals. We all have our own interests. We all have our own approach. But the basic tenets of scientific research have evolved over the centuries from alchemists, or for way before alchemists, to where we are today with very sophisticated instrumentation, with thought processes, with an understanding of quantum mechanics that we never dreamed of. We still have a problem trying to discuss what light is. You know, is it a quantum? Is it a particle? Is the electron a particle? Or is it a wave? What does all that mean? This is philosophical, all right? And scientists quite often don't want to answer this question either because it's too difficult to answer, all right? Mm-hmm. And so I decided to respond to Deepa Nwita that her question is not a question that needs to be asked, all right? Science will evolve in its own way regardless of the ethnic contributions of the people doing it. I do believe that, all right? I also believe that the focus of the research, that can change. Absolutely, that can change. Whether it becomes dietary, whether it becomes demographics of the spread of a virus. Why is it that there seems to be a disproportionate number of African American and maybe Hispanics, although I don't know that, suffering within the United States now from this virus than, say, white Anglo-Saxons? But of course, you know the answer. It's got nothing to do, I think, at the moment with the ethnic nature of my DNA compared to, say, yours or your family. It's because I've run away. I have the economic capacity to move somewhere so I don't have to meet people. So I would tend to argue straight off the bat that any disparity on ethnic composition of people suffering from this COVID-19 is more socioeconomic than genetic. But I could be wrong because the experiment hasn't been done. And that's when I come back to what scientists, we get into trouble. People say that's the answer. People say they want scientists to say it's socioeconomic, and therefore we've got to change the way that society is operating. I think they're probably right, and I tend to agree with the answer that they come up with. But we don't yet know if there's a genetic component to this. There probably is not, but probably is not one that the world likes, and sure, politicians don't like it.
Right.
So anyway, Deepa Nwita, I will tell you, I don't think it matters that if there's more diversity of science. I think the diversity of science is its evolution that will be taking care of itself, all right? The focus absolutely definitely makes a difference by having a diverse group of scientists, or biomedical researchers in this case. Yes, and of course it's to the benefit of the country. What is it, in 10 years or so, 20 years, the white Anglo-Saxon population of America will be less than 50%. Well, you know, that other 50%, we've got to make sure that they're going into careers which have traditionally seemed not appropriate for whatever reason. It's always appropriate, but it just hasn't worked out that way. So that's as far as I could go. I think the diversity of science will take care of itself.
Okay. Fair
That's
enough.
today's, that's today's answer. When I again next time, the answer may have to be very different because she'll come up with a whole scenario that you don't realize.
Yes,
But
that
it
was
does come
actually
out
my
of
next
her.
question.
That's the big thing. She's seen so many Indian scientists bending over backwards to pretend that they were British in terms of what their goals were.
Right, right. Dr. Asgupta had actually talked to me about the argument, I think last semester or so, because she was talking about if racial and ethnic diversity was enough to count diversity in any discipline. Because if we are trained in the same thinking methods of the area that are apart from uh, in this case the colonizers, then we wouldn't have any diversity in reality because we're only repeating or
Yeah.
perpetuating those thinking methods that do not necessarily mean we're diverse. So that's
My answer to her is evolution. Science is a living, breathing organism. All right. We're
right.
all helping do it. That organism can mutate, it can develop, it can transform, it can evolve. And it doesn't matter the ethnic nature of the people in it, the body itself will evolve. And that's the saving grace that I can come up with to answer her question.
Of course. Okay. Thank you so much for saying that. Okay, I think we can move on now to other questions. She wants to also ask you about the utilitarian aspects of science, and I'm quoting, that do not interest you. She says that you have always practiced science as a play. And the question is play a feasible goal in today's application-driven research atmosphere?
Aha. I think the answer is unfortunately it's becoming less and less so. But I want to, before I answer it, clarify the word play and game. Yeah, I like to play games. All right. I like to play, I like chess. I like chess a
Oh, I
lot.
like chess too.
So that classifies as a game. It's bigger than a game. And so when I tell Deep that, yeah, I look at what I do as a game, it's more of a game along the idea of chess and a sort of a whole strategy of one move following another and what happens there.
Hmm.
What I really like to do is, Cressier, I like to make molecules. That's what I do. I'm a synthetic, predominantly synthetic inorganic chemist. I specialize in two parts of the periodic table, which is a wonderful playground, by the way. The periodic table is a playground for me because I want to take elements in one area, elements in another, and I want to see, hey, mostly you don't see this element bind to this. Why?
Hmm.
What happens when you do that? Do you get new chemical reactions? It's always novelty. It's something new. Science thrives on a new result. All right. It may be important, it may be trivial, but it's the newness. And sometimes the molecules actually look beautiful. The arrangement of the atoms in three-dimensional space can
Hmm.
just be, on its own, visually attractive. And if you can modify one piece of a molecule such that a piece over here does something. Right now, I'm just finished writing a paper on the chemistry of lead. Now, lead is everybody's bête noire. Nobody likes lead. It's a heavy element. It causes poisoning young children. Um, Lead paints were bad. Sarko spewed lead into the atmosphere. We all got
Hmm.
sick. And all of that is true. But that's what we did with it. That's what society deemed was the utility of lead. We wanted it in motor cars to make the engines run more efficiently. We wanted it in paints because the paint would be more vivid. But taken all the way apart, lead is just another element. It's one of 116 or whatever.
Right.
And I like it. I like playing with it. And what I've been able to find recently is that, I'll be technical here. Normally, the form of lead that I like is what we call tetravalent. It's got 4 bonds directly, which means that it will be in a tetrahedral fashion. You know what a tetrahedron is. So there's a central element, one up, one down, 190 degrees, one forward, one back, all the angles 109 degrees. It's a perfect tetrahedron. But we've now been discovering that if we replace one of those groups and way away from the lead, you put what I call a dangling arm. Okay, so normally I'm sitting like this, okay? And so that's the way I fold my arm. So let's assume that I let one of my arms dangle out here. And at the end of my hand, instead of fingers, I have a lollipop, all right? I mean, ice cream. And all of a sudden, like nature, the ice cream will come to my mouth, right? That dangling arm, because I've got I've set it up, a trap. Now now my structure, the way I'm appearing to you is different. I should be like this, right? But all of a sudden, I'm like this. And I've been able to play around with lead with a team, group of students and faculty, in making molecules that will do this. And it's the first few examples of lead involving in that chemistry. I find that really attractive. I find it delightful. Does it have any use? Probably not. I could argue that there might be one, but the bottom line is no. I'm not doing it for a utilitarian purpose. I'm doing it to discover new structures, new science, new ways in which something way out here can come back and find it useful to interact with me as being the lead atom.
Right.
It's expensive. I mean, I've had millions and millions of dollars worth of research support over the 40 years that I've been doing research at UT El Paso. Had money from the National Science Foundation, about 12 million. I've had about 6, 7 million from NIH just to run the program. I've had 4 or 5 million to do basic tin biomedical research. I've had money from NATO, North Atlantic Treaty. I've had money from all over. So, and we've done a lot of interesting, beautiful chemistry with that.
Right.
It's going to change the way the world works. Probably not. But the students that I've had working with me have gone out to do quite amazing things. One of them is currently the head of neurosurgery at Harvard, making phenomenal difference. Another one, he just retired. He finally was the chair of chemistry at Princeton. He became the provost at Rice University. These are UTEP students that have gone on. Quite a few of them have become faculty. I think you've talked to Sky Fortier earlier. He's one of the chemistry faculty. He was an undergraduate in my group. And so I've had about 200 of these students go through. And they've gone on. Some are doing useful things. Others are doing similar to what I'm doing, making molecules because they're pretty, or working in industry to make better, I don't know what, oil for lubrication. I don't know. But the thing is, I do not think of myself as a scientist to solve immediate societal problems. I just don't. I think of myself as to get new science, new chemistry that tickles my fancy, that I enjoy. In that process, we come up with new chemistry, new science, and practitioners who go out and do good things like that I just told you about. I don't think you have to have all scientists focusing on immediate societal needs. I'll never forget, I read once an article that in 1938, before the beginning of the Second World War, England was in a hole. Germany was rearming, and England was just playing cricket, watching football, and
Right.
put together a panel, one N, one L, not like mine. Put together a panel that said, what are the important things that we should concentrate on science in the next decade, 5 years, I don't know, time period. That was really interesting because at the end of all that, they came up with, they wanted synthetic rubber. They wanted synthetic rubber because they were afraid that the German Navy would interfere with the supply of natural rubber coming from the Far East, Malaysia, to the United Kingdom. And so therefore, that was their main thing. You think of the science that was done between 1938 and 1948. Synthetic rubber, nothing.
Right.
All the nuclear power, not that that's necessarily all good, but all of the different things that scientists advanced on, the medicines, the analytical processes, synthetic rubber was the least important, all right? In fact, it wasn't important. So if you, as a scientist, if I get carried away with what does society need, then I've got to look out in society and see what are the issues now. They may be gone in 5 years. What are the big scientific problems? That's the evil of science. You cannot force science too much, I think, in a particular direction. You can focus programs like on AIDS, like currently on this COVID-19. Yeah, that's totally appropriate. But in the big picture of a chemist in his laboratory at the University of Texas at El Paso, no, I'm just going to carry on to study what I find of interest and what I'm good at, and where I can intuitively almost see, hey, here's a problem. This could really lead to some interesting new science, new chemistry. So evolution, intuition, these are not well, they're scientific terms, but that's fair enough. I'll stand with that.
Right. Yes, that kind of introduces this next question about the decline of public trust in sciences. Do you think how do you explain because Dr. Gupta is kind of assuming that this has already happened. How do you explain the decline of public trust in the sciences in spite of its many marvels?
Well, because we've made mistakes and because society itself has not been ready to use the results of science always in a responsible fashion. All right. I mean, a scientist cannot make society use his or her science in the best possible way. All right. It just can't. You know, I like motor cars. I got a nice little sports car, and it can go very fast. I'm not allowed to go very fast, but why is it then that people make cars that can go 200 miles an hour when there's nowhere I can legally drive at 200 miles an hour? This is an intellectual conundrum. This is a philosophical point that I guess Deep and I should discuss one day. Because you've made something doesn't mean to say that you've got to use it to the full extent that society's imagination thinks is appropriate. All right. And sometimes we do live in a society that's driven by economic return. All right. I mean, I understand that. if I come up with a clever invention of a new drug, then I suppose it's not unreasonable that I'd start a startup company and I try to make money. That money can go back into more research. I can pay for the people who are working for their kids to go to college. I mean, money can be very useful, pays taxes, makes the roads better. But when it becomes too much of the object, and that happens, that's a problem. That's a problem. And the profit motive seems to be pretty universal. And so people cut corners. Just like sometimes people publish incomplete research because it's to their professional benefit. Doesn't happen a lot. But companies will set up to cut corners, all right? And not do all of the necessary homework to prove that, in fact, this particular use of science may have some negative consequences down the line. But it's society that does that. Very seldom is it the individual scientist, because whether that's true or not, I don't know. I like to think it is, so that'll do. So, I mean, people see the results of science, and it's usually pretty positive. But when there's a mistake, then they become suspicious. And that suspicion can be in the back of their mind until the next time. I don't think I really addressed your question in its totality. Most people have a great respect for science, and it's deserved. Science is different from other things. I can, for example, do all sorts of illegal things in my car and never get caught, all right? So I can, in fact, drive sometimes at 125 miles an hour on I-10, all right? And I must say, I've done, but not often. I tend not to go through traffic lights because somebody might see me and report me. Well, but by and large, in science, if you do a falsehood, in the end, it will become discovered, all right? Because if you do a result in science, and it's an interesting one, but you've made it up because you've falsified or you've ignored some data over here, other people will say, hey, you know, hey, that guy Pannell did something really interesting, but I'm not sure. I don't quite see, his data doesn't fit with everything that he thinks. I'm going to repeat that. I'm going to see if I can understand a little bit better. And then what happens? Hey, somebody publishes a paper and said, oh, Pannell just published this paper. And if I could use the word, it's bullshit. And this is the reason that it's bullshit. It's wrong because he didn't do this, this, this. That is death knell to the reputation, would be my reputation as a scientist. When somebody else going to say, hey, this was all wrong. And so there is that about scientists. Yes, we're social animals, but we do understand that we're in an arena that if we make extravagant claims, we'd be prepared to back them up, and if we can't, they'll be exposed quite readily. So that is a built-in safeguard for scientists. That doesn't apply when the science is utilized in society. You know, may not be utilized for 20 years. There was a drug when I was a kid called thalidomide. It was a drug for ladies who were pregnant to stop them getting morning sickness. And it came in what we call two different diastereoisomers, a D and an L, left hand and right hand. Well, the left hand was good. It stopped the morning sickness. But the right hand version, which always came with the left hand version, caused mutations at birth. And I remember I was a bus conductor at the time as a student. And we went past a place called the Chailey Heritage in southeast England. And these children with no arms, stubs, no legs. I mean, it was agonizing to see And that was because the drug hadn't been sufficiently researched. Luckily, it was never used in North America because the FDA was much more scrupulous. But in England and in Germany, it was used widely before they realized what a disaster it was. So was that the fault of the scientists? It was certainly the fault of the people who decided that that drug was going to be useful and that they would sell it. They didn't do enough testing. Life is full of cautionary tales, right? There's no perfection.
Right.
And science has its share of big mistakes, but they usually get rectified by the scientists because that's the nature of the science, constant reinvestigation. And they say the more outlandish the claim, the more amazing the claim, the more amazing has got to be the evidence to back it up.
Right.
Okay.
Right. No, go ahead. Continue.
No. I was just going to change topics a little bit.
Oh, right. Well, I have a follow-up question on that topic. Do you think this comes with the premise that trust is needed, trust in the sciences is needed in society to, flourish, right? But do you think a proper science communication can close the gap between the lack of public trust in the sciences and trust?
Well, yes, because I think that the communication doesn't, it's like going back to the science studio issue. Yes, we talk about science in there, or we get a lay technical presentation, but a good part of the program is to talk about the scientist, to let the scientist introduce herself or himself. And that's what I think is easier for the population to understand. Here's a good person, interesting background, how they got into doing the science. And yes, I think this person sounds like a totally honorable, good person. Well, you hear that enough, and you hear 500 different interviews with 500 scientists, assuming you listen to all of them, which you wouldn't. But then that's a way to change perceptions, because now they're beginning to know scientists. Even if it's only for 10 minutes in this 30-minute radio show, they say, hey, that's an interesting person. Oh, and it's a mother also, I've got 2 young children, or whatever. That is the part that will give more credibility to the escapade of science than figuring out, what the genetic sequencing is, or something like that, too technical. But if they know and got a good feeling for the scientist, then they say, hey, now I'm feeling much more confident of something that I see coming out of a research laboratory. Yeah, so I think that's, yes, I think that's important. I think it's true too. Yeah, I do.
Okay, that leads me to my next question about how science should treat society as consumers of research. Well, do you think that society should be, the public just be the consumers of research, or if they should have a role of contributing more to the research process?
Well, that goes back to this business of getting a more diverse scientific community. That will open up many more areas of potential research. I do believe that being a research scientist is an awesome privilege. All right, I've had a privileged career. I've focused on those things that I thought interested me. They've trained students who have done some wonderful things. I've learned a lot of new science, and people around the world who are also interested in what I've done find it interesting, etc., etc. How far the public that pay the bills should worry about what I do? That's a good question. They have to have a certain trust in the scientists, all right? That means they've also got to do their own homework. They've got to come to a certain extent and pay a little bit more attention to public lectures or whatever. I don't know. We don't do that very much. We should. It cuts both ways. There's got to be a trust. We, as scientists, shouldn't be frivolous with the way we spend our time and our funding. There is, within science, a peer review system which allows other scientists to evaluate the strength of an idea that I want to do research on. So I wanted to do this lead chemistry. Okay? So to do that, I need funding. So I can go to a company that makes lead compounds. There hardly are any. Or I can go to a government agency and say, hey, here's my proposal, fund it. They will be managers. They won't necessarily know anything about lead. I'm using this as an example. But they will know people in the scientific community who are experts in the area. Because there are experts. They will send a proposal out. If it's a totally frivolous, worthless proposal, then these experts will be able to understand that. They're the safeguard. They're the safeguard that taxpayers' money, for example, isn't just frittered away, all right? Because these people take their job seriously. I do it a lot, constantly reviewing proposals and papers. That's a safeguard. Whether it's foolproof safeguard, I don't know. But after a funding of 2 or 3 years, you then publish some papers. If the papers you've published are obviously trivial, they haven't pushed forward, then you won't get funding the next time around. So there's that safeguard built in. The public has to have a certain trust that people like me are not frivolous, even if I like to make jokes and have a humorous attitude towards life. It helps me live life, all right? But we're not frivolous in the science that we do. We've got underlying expectations of new discovery. That's what research is. If the society says, well, enough of this lead, we're spending too much money on lead, let's concentrate more on COVID-19. I can hardly tell them they're wrong, all right? There's a big problem there right now. Whether it'll be there in 5 years, maybe in 5 years we'll look back on this and say, hey, scientists came up with a vaccine, seems to work, you know. We went through hell, we went through some bad times. The government wasn't responsive enough, it didn't plan enough. But now we're ready for the next one. That will be in advance, right? Just because we're putting a lot of money now into COVID-19 antibodies, etc. In fact, these last science studios that I've been doing, I've been talking to faculty on campus who are actually making a contribution to the COVID-19, to the test down there in the city, in biological sciences, or trying to design new little molecules that will interrupt the protein structure of the COVID and stop it from being able to invade cells. All of these things are currently absolutely important. I think they won't be in 5 years. I think by then there'll be another big issue. And we'll always have to face the big issues. But we also have to constantly push all of science higher and higher, all right? So there'll always be someone out there that will find lead of interest, I hope.
Right.
To persuade, come up with new molecules based upon lead that defy the norm, then people say, hey, something's happening down there. Interesting.
Right, and that's also important to, tackle as scientists, right? As you were mentioning earlier about having research projects that you enjoy, just for the simple
Yeah,
motive of enjoyment, right? Or play, as you were mentioning in
you,
the moment of the conversation.
there's no doubt my philosophy of my life is that I always, and I tell every student this, I tell faculty, new ones, old ones, anyone who wants to listen, always I must, and you must, find time to do nothing. Because when I'm doing nothing, I'm not doing nothing. My mind is working, I'm thinking of different things. Or I'm listening to one of my favorite symphonies is the Mahler Resurrection Symphony. It's the second symphony of Gustav Mahler. Magnificent, based upon a religious themes of which I don't share anything in common with. I'm an atheist. But the music speaks for itself and gives me phenomenal satisfaction. All right. And I picked up a book. It could be a War and Peace. I went through War and Peace about 3 summers ago. All right. I had an illness and spent a lot of time that summer reading. When I do nothing, and when you do nothing, or when Deep does nothing, we're doing something, but it's something that we don't quite necessarily know what we're doing. The mind, it's rather like sleep. You have a dream. You know where the hell that dream came from, but it's somehow your body is responding to the environment it's in. So I do believe enjoyment is a key feature. If you go through life not enjoying what you're doing, damn it, find something else to do. All right? Absolutely. And it's a lesson a lot of people never seem to learn. And of course, not everybody can do a job that they enjoy. But having said that, I worked on the buses in England. I just told you. I was the guy that went around collecting the fares and giving them a ticket. There was a driver and me going around. I had a lot of fun. I was interacting with the public. I like people. I'm gregarious. All right. It was fun. I enjoyed that job. I knew I wasn't going to do it for a career, but it was good. And if you're lucky enough to always do things that you enjoy at one level or another, and you have to do some things you don't enjoy. Grading is one thing I don't particularly enjoy, because at the end of it, there's going to be people who get bad grades. And that's a fact of life. I don't believe everybody should just get a passing grade. If they haven't been able to prove to me either an oral exam, which I like to give, or a written exam, then they'll get a less satisfactory grade. It's always disappointing because you always think you've somehow failed that student. But I tell them, it's the journey to an education is twofold. It's me and it's the student. We're in this together. But if only one half's doing the work, it won't work. Anyway, talking of doing nothing, I want to get to this little issue here. I was talking to Deep and Wheater on the phone a couple of days ago, and we came up with an idea. I said, look, I can't go into the laboratory right now. Now that may change in a week or two, but for a couple of months, the laboratory has been closed. Can't go in. And even if we can go back in, only a limited number of people at a time. And I agree with all of that. Absolutely. I said, well, now's the time for these, what are they? In German, it's called Gedanken experiment. It's a mind experiment. What am I doing? I'm thinking about chemistry, or I'm thinking about new approaches to the radio, or I'm thinking new approaches to Deep and Wheater and I trying to put together a coalescence of philosophy with chemistry, for example.
Hmm.
because philosophy is a Gedanken experiment. They don't set up experiments very often that I can tell. Maybe there's some math in there that they have to do at some stage at the very highest levels, but it's a thought process. It's all thinking and coming up with good ideas, new ideas, strange ideas. Well, maybe chemistry at this time of being shut out of the laboratory and philosophy are getting closer together because we're both sitting at home thinking, right? How can we make that a new model for some aspect of philosophy of chemistry? And I'm thinking about that because we have a friend, Eric Sherry, who's originally from Malta, but grew up in England. He's now at the University of California, Los Angeles. He has a journal all about philosophy of science, philosophy of chemistry, etc. And I want to write something in there. I'm intrigued. What can I say that would be of interest to the people that think of themselves as philosophers of science?
Hmm.
I think, well, I can get with Stephen Rita. She can tell me what people like her think, and I can tell them what scientists like me think about what she thinks. And we can come together. I want to write a paper with her this summer. Okay, I don't know what about, but something along these lines. And that's because I'm at home thinking, doing nothing. It's
Right.
been very good. I haven't turned the television on but about 3 times in 6 weeks, 7 weeks.
Yes.
Anyway,
That, you know what, thank you very much for saying that. That is actually one of the goals of of this project that Dr. Esguta and I are doing. Merging these two different
yeah,
that used to be the same thinking method, right? But merging these two disciplines that now seem different in the way that they approach problems. Anyway, they are more similar than we appreciate. So
that's good.
yeah, I
Right.
do have one more question to ask. Um,
Okay.
and this is about outreach activities in the science department. Dr.
Uh,
Escuta says that most of these attempts are about creating more enrollment in sciences, but she wonders if there are other outreach activities that are apart from mere enrollment.
I not necessarily agree with the premise. We don't in chemistry have a lot of outreach. All right. I think the radio show that I do is clearly outreach. That's got nothing to do with enrollment. Okay. Nothing at all. Um, the 100 at 100 that I did was, outreach as a scientist, reaching out to people doing research elsewhere, just so that they can tell us, that's nothing to do with enrollment. The university, not the university, the chemistry department used to have, I suppose it still does, although not at the moment, something called a chemistry circus. And the physics department has a physics circus where we will go to schools or put on demonstrations full of explosions and funny things happening over here and bubbles coming over there as a demonstration of the fun part of chemistry. Um, that has not necessarily to do with enrollment per se,
Mhm.
but just to get younger people excited about an experiment, what they can see. And then if you ask questions about it, what's going to happen if I prick this with a pin? What's going to happen if I light a match over here? Or whatever it is.
Right.
Or walk physics, where they walk on a bed of nails, right? Or when you walk across charcoal, it's a light, right? And you think, how the devil does that work? Why doesn't the nail go through the skin, but it never does. All right, because the mass is balanced out over the whole foot, and so the pressure in one place is not sufficient to cause the nail to pierce the skin. So you can teach by experiment, and I think chemistry is particularly lucky in that regard. Now, what's that aimed at? That's not aimed directly at enrollment, but just to get young people enthused and maintain their enthusiasm for the concept of science, all right? So that when they grow older, whether they're in business, whether they're in medicine, whether they're in truck driving, whatever, they can every now and again think back to some of the things they saw and thought, hey, that was fun. And of course, oh yes, I remember, that was because this was hydrogen and oxygen, and you know, it formed together to form water, but in an explosive fashion. Could you just excuse me a minute? Someone's at the front
Of course.
door.
Go ahead.
Thank you very much. Oh, very good. That was the FedEx. The FedEx, somebody just sent me a package of the Praga, New York meat.
Wow.
I'm cooking by myself, and so they sent me a nice package of meat. So that's nice. Anyway, going back, the outreach isn't just for more enrollment. If it is, I'm opposed to it. Kids, little kids, probably you were. I mean, science was sort of fun at one stage, and then it became too mathematical for you, perhaps, or I don't know what, but your enthusiasm went down, right, as your interest in other things went up. I'm one of the people who thinks perhaps we turn out too many people as scientists with the expectation that they become scientists for a career, all right? If we could put out a lot of scientists who then go on for law degrees or go on for teaching, right? Or go on for, I don't know, accounting for all I know, because I know in England, a lot of people that get degrees in chemistry land up being accountants. I know that because over the last 10 years, I've had every year 1 or 2 English students come over for what they call a gap year.
Okay.
So a degree in chemistry, and then they come over and spend a year in my research lab, and then go back and get a master's degree and a bachelor's degree at the same time. And the jobs there aren't sufficient for all the people being turned out, and a lot of them go into accounting, and they become very good because the scientific training in their mind is much better than the training accountants get themselves, right? And so they can problem solve to a better extent, and that was quite a surprise to me when I found that out. So I think more people that know a fair amount about science, they should go out there and do all sorts of careers, not just stay in science. My problem is that we don't do a very good job at suggesting that there are careers out there where you take the science with you, but you don't necessarily do science all the time. All right. My career, you know, I was a scientist, I am a scientist, and it's ingrained. But I've done equally well if I'd been a lawyer. All right. And I'd have an edge because I understand basic scientific principles, and not a lot of people do. Anyway, so I don't believe that the outreach we do is aimed at increasing enrollment only. I don't do anything myself that talks about increasing enrollment. I might recruit a student that I think is particularly good to come into my lab, right? But enrollment for its own sake, but that is a problem. That is a problem. If we've got a large number of faculty and they all want to have students to work with them in the research lab, graduate students, but we've got no idea where those graduate students are going to get jobs. And then when you think about it, 50% of the graduate students that enter the program come from China or India or somewhere else. And I question why we do that. I know science is an international activity, but I am not totally convinced. Which of course then does go back to recruitment. Why can't we persuade Americans who went to American high schools that a career in science at the highest level of a PhD is worthy? Now they think, oh, I'll go to industry. I don't need a PhD. Or I'll go to, oh, what else do they do? Well, medicine, obviously. Business, they want to make money, right? It's easy to make money in America if you've got a good scientific head. So a lot of people that I know are working on Wall Street or something like that with degrees in science. They don't want to come back and do the hard work to get a PhD and become a faculty member. 50% of our faculty at UT El Paso were born outside of the United States in chemistry. It may be more than 50% actually. We've got 22 faculty, 1, 2, maybe only 30% were born in the US. Well, there's an argument there that says we should be doing more recruiting of Americans to go and take science faculty positions. Like I told you right at the beginning, that's what the MARC program does.
Right.
We wait to go away and get PhD, come back and be faculty members. Guy Fortier was a perfect example. But it's difficult, it's hard. It's a privilege, but it's not easy, all right? Being a research faculty, because you've got to constantly get money, you've got to justify yourself, and you've got to find time to do nothing.
Perfect, then. Okay, Dr. Pannell, that's it for my questions. I'm not sure if you want to comment something else that you might want to emphasize for the purposes of this project, or anything else that you might comment on.
No, I wish Deep all the success with this. I'm certainly going to carry on working with her over the next few years, doing one thing or another. But I've enjoyed this chat. I don't know if it's been useful for you or not. It's been fun just to have to articulate in response to questions.
Yes, I agree. Thank you so much. You're a wonderful thinker. Thank you so much for this conversation.
Sorry, say that again.
Oh, I was saying you are a wonderful thinker, and an amazing interviewee.
Oh, okay. All right.
Thank you. Thank you for this conversation.
Take care of yourself, okay?